Quiet, quiet, friends. I have a tale to tell before the tavern closes tonight. I have come a very long way and seen so many places. I have heard many stories, and I am happy to be here now to share them with you. So, gather round. Now, many of the tales I have told you tie into an event known as the Cataclysm, a world-shattering war that forced us humans off of the continent to the east and conjured the great storms that ravage our lands almost unendingly. I have told you about the demons that now live in our homeland, that cross the sea each winter and battle the great kingdoms of our eastern coastline. They, too, were caused by the fall of our ancient empire across the sea. However, I haven't told you how it started, or even what it is. I promise we will have many stories about the Cataclysm. But tonight, I wish to tell you of its beginning, through the eyes of a survivor. A matriarch of my family, 7 lifetimes removed from me. However, as a young one, I found her journal. So tonight, I would like to read her story, for all of you, from her tome. 490 years ago, this grandmother was but a girl, only 15 years to her name. She was born in our ancient empire, Alexelsis. It was a sprawling nation that covered the continent, but she lived in the heart of the capital city, Alexioste. Her father was a soldier, and her mother was an artisan who forged the most beautiful jewelry. Their home was massive, comfortable, with silver statuettes and symbols of griffins adorning any spare space. She wrote that her father rode griffins into battle, and as such they became a symbol that meant the moon and stars to her family. They lived comfortably, happily, as it was a time of peace. However, like all peace, it could not last. I will not tell you of the Lord of Sorrows today, as I believe this story is more impactful if felt in the same way my ancestor experienced it, without answers, without meaning, as that is how it all began for her. It was a normal summer day in the capital city, the high towers gleaming in the sun, the singing of birds filling the skies, and the voices of the merchants rising to prepare their stands filling the streets. My ancestor, Achaia, woke up in the city. She wandered from her bed and out into the streets. There was to be a festival. One of food and celebration of all the empire had accomplished. The Feast of the Seventh Divine, it was called, as it celebrated the emperor, who they claimed was the final god in the crown of the cosmos. He was infinitely old, undying and unchanging. Under his leadership, the Alexelsian Empire had spread to control lands far larger than any kingdom can boast today. Achaia ran through the streets, wonder filling her eyes as they pitched great tents and set massive tables for the feast. She could hear the playing of pipes and the laughter of strangers, as today was to be one of merriment. All through the streets of the great city of Alexioste she could see the faces of strangers from every corner of the empire. However, their faces all slowly turned and looked to the far side of the city. Where the emperor's temple stood high upon the hill, there was a rumbling. She described it as almost unnoticeable at first, a shaking that could be felt only by mice. But all eyes in the city turned to look, as if compelled. From the ground something began to rise, tearing at the surface as though it was aching for breath. A tower began to spiral and expand into the sky. It was carved of black stone, and each brick smoothed and cemented in place as the tower grew. It continued to grow ever higher, and many say that it goes up as far as it goes down. From depths to heavens, from highest to darkest. The people stood in the streets, their eyes locked on the emerging titanic structure. Achaia felt a tremble in her heart as though the world itself begged her to run. Others clearly felt it too, as many began to turn and flee. Achaia watched as every window of the tower began to spew the bodies of creatures unknown to her. They shrieked into the morning air, their voices sounding like those of a dying animal, a beast in pain. She turned, sprinting, weeping through the streets of her city, finding her way home where her father wrapped her in his arms. He, too, had been weeping. Her mother had been close to the temple when the monsters emerged. She was one of the first casualties of this new war. Achaia stared at her father. He was wearing his armor. The griffin he rode, Eleanor, standing behind him. Achaia begged her father not to engage this enemy. There could be no victory here. Her father was a brave man, one of honor and proud service. However, in looking into his daughter's eyes, he realized that before his service to the emperor, his obligation was to serve his family. To make his daughter an orphan in the name of honor was not honorable at all. His heart shattered as he decided to desert his comrades to save his daughter's life. He grabbed his spear and his shield before hefting his daughter onto the saddle of his griffin. The massive beast did its best to adjust to the weight of the two of them. Its wide golden eyes locked upon the street. It could sense the monsters were near, and it would do anything to defend its rider. Together they fled on the back of the magnificent creature, taking to the skies and flying away from the city of Alexioste. Achaia watched as the tower continued to grow in the distance, her eyes widening in fear as many of the monsters that had been spilling from it like blood began to outstretch wings and ascend into the air. Her father must have seen it too, because he shouted out a command to his mount and it began to swoop and pivot in the air, taking rapid maneuvers to protect them. However, these monsters were fast. Achaia stared in terror as the beasts neared, skin with protruding scales jutting from their flesh in disorganized armored plates. Some wielded the elements of the land, and others wielded crude weapons and shields. Their faces held pained looks, as though their skulls didn't fit under their poorly formed muscles. In mere moments, they were already within range to engage. Achaia's father readied his spear in his hand, and she could feel the griffin tense and prepare to fight. In one deft maneuver, Eleanor the griffin halted in the air, breaking away and getting behind the demons. Her father thrust his spear forth as his beast sped forward, forcing the long blade toward the ribs of one of the creatures, but it deflected off of its armored body. It opened its mouth and slammed it shut around the rim of her father's shield. However, he was a gifted soldier, adjusting his spear arm to force the blade against its leg. He shouted another order, and the griffin broke into a spin. The blade was forced into the creature's leg as it tore the shield in half under the crushing force of its jaws. However, Achaia's father forgot that she was not accustomed to this sort of combat, and she fell from the saddle. She wrote that the air was frigid as she tumbled from the sky. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it over the screaming of the wind. It was like her breath had been torn away from her and offered to the heavens. She watched as her father and his griffin committed to a dive, eyes locked on her. The monsters above had followed suit. Nearer and nearer to the ground, her father's griffin tucked its wings entirely to pick up speed. She watched as one of the demons caught up to them and grabbed her father's armor in one of its misshapen hands, ripping him from the saddle. However, the griffin did not relent. Her father's dutiful beast caught her and wrapped her body in its own, covering her with its wings and holding her tight to its chest. The two then crashed through the trees. When she opened her eyes, they were on the ground. The griffin Eleanor made heavy, heaving breaths as life began to fade from it. It lifted its wings to allow her to step away. The creature had been broken upon impact with the earth, its eyes mournful but still full of pride as it had done what its master would have wanted. Achaea took one of its flight feathers and held it close to her chest. That same feather now adorns my hat. She looked around for her father and found him laying under a nearby tree. His armor was in tatters, blood soaking the metal. His spear sat broken in the mouth of a demon a few steps from him. He beckoned his daughter near. She ran, hugging him tight, forcing him to cough. He made his daughter look into his eyes. He then spoke his dying words.
Achaea, promise your father that you will be wise, you will trust your instincts, and you will stay safe. You must survive this. Promise me, Achaea.
She nodded and felt a heavy cord wrap itself around her heart, a tightness in her chest, forcing her to scream and weep as her father faded before her. Only moments passed before the cord around her heart tightened again. The little magic told her it was time to leave. She kissed her father's forehead and ripped his broken spear from the mouth of the demon. She lifted his shattered shield from the ground and began to walk. She looked over her shoulder. Her feet were leading her away from the city, away from the tower that rose infinitely into the blackening sky. She walked for days, hiding from the demons in the sky under the cover of the trees, stalking away from demons on the road by crawling in the underbrush. She would hunt rabbits for food, or eat whatever the demons slaughtered and left behind. In a time like this, she was grateful for the forest. It served as her protector and her provider. Every village she passed had been burned, any occupants having either fled or met a cruel fate. A season into walking, and she joined a group of surviving people who had been using the wilderness the same as she had. They took her in, horrified by what she told them, and refusing to abandon a young girl in a situation like this. They told her that the emperor had been captured, soon to be killed. Those who remained of the army had instructed any and all people to run for the coast, where they were building great ships to take them across the sea. So, her and the survivors continued their long walk to the ocean. With the survivors was a young man, Califer, who was Achaea's own age and showed her the most kindness. He shared his story, his parents being lost moments after the demons appeared in his town. The two would share food and allow each other the space to weep when the fear became too great. A week into their journey to the coast, something happened. In an instant, the world turned gray. Clouds rolled across the sky, the trees all withered and decayed in seconds, turning to ash on the wind. The grass died. The animals who called this land their home let out a collective song, a weeping, shattering the silence as they all mourned the death of their land, the death of themselves. Achaea watched as all that lived began to die, and tears ran from her eyes. There was never a moment more vile. Her hope shattered like glass. There was no surviving this now. No trees to protect her and no animals to eat. Califer held her close and soothed her tears, his eyes upon the skies in case the monsters heard her, but his heart, right where it was, pressed to hers. The monsters did come. descending from the skies, burrowing from the dirt, rushing from the distance. Califer grabbed her hand and began to run. He forgot all about the other survivors, focused only on getting Achaea to safety. The two hid in a cave for days. When Achaea wept, Califer soothed her with his songs. And when Califer wept, Achaea held him close and whispered to him of how nice it will be when they are able to see birds again. One day, somewhere else. They continued to the coast, covering themselves in the ashen soil to hide from sight. When they reached the coast, a massive port city stood before them, abandoned and painted with the smoldering remains of their world. They ran to the docks, but could see ships far away in the distance. They had been left behind. Califer began to cry. Achaea grabbed his hand and shut her eyes. She begged the cord around her heart to tighten, for her instincts and her father's words to guide her. She refused to surrender. Her feet began to walk, leading Califer along the coastline. They walked several hundred long steps, but eventually found a large door in the side of a hill, masoned of the same black stone that forged that God's forsaken tower. Her feet told her that this would get them to safety, but warned her that inside of that dark place would be the most dangerous place she had ever been. She steadied her soul and led the two of them into the deep. What she saw was a maze, stretching infinitely with staircases that rose back to the surface in random spots. The demons who wandered down here had built a labyrinth that could reach anywhere and contain any number of horrors. Achaea and Califer spent days scavenging nearby towns and gathering food from the hollow remains of their country. Once they were ready, they entered the monster's maze. It was truly massive, black masoned stone jutting at odd angles, creating an impossible place. Navigation proved nearly impossible, but the two of them just kept heading west. They often encountered demons in the dark place. However, Achaea had learned how to hide from these creatures, and when they couldn't hide, they would run. Days passed, then seasons, then years. Achaea and Califer walked under torchlight together, their food supplies dwindling, but they found that many of the staircases up and out of the maze led to the surface of small islands, where they could gather fish and other supplies. Achaea grew up from just a girl to a woman in those tunnels, with Califer by her side. One day in the tunnels something felt amiss. The air smelled of death and whispered of dangers. As they rounded what must have been their 1000th corner of the day, a demon lunged from the dark and attacked them. Califer threw Achaea to the ground to protect her, but the demon's claws sunk deep into his arm. It leaned in close, its draconian maw opening to reveal a burning sphere of light. Achaea scrambled to her feet and sunk the broken spear into the demon's mouth. It released Califer, but his wounds were deep. He fell to the stone floor and Achaea rushed to hold him. He begged her just to run, but Achaea refused to leave him behind. There, the two shared a passionate kiss in the dark. Achaea felt the thread pull as tight on her heart as it ever had. She helped Califer to his feet, and with his body leant on hers, she shut her eyes and began to walk. Fate, little magic, and instinct guiding her feet corner to corner, turn to turn. She does not know how long they walked, but Califer survived alongside her. She just kept whispering to him. Here in the dark, promise life to me. Survive alongside me and do not leave. I promise to stand beside you, never to flee. Together with you, my fate to weave. They walked another 8 days before her closed eyes and wandering feet led them up a staircase. When they emerged from the black stone door, they stood in a cascading mountain range under a torrential rain. Belgreveld, the Wild Kingdom. They walked to a nearby river, and there they drank clean water, ate rabbits and deer. They built a cabin along the river's edge. The two survived together, and around them a town began to grow. The two did not know when the rain began, but it had started the same day as the death of the land they had left. The town they built is the same town we stand in today, where this tavern was built. Achaia was known to watch the horizon, always watching to make sure no demons were watching her hamlet and her family. She was always ready to trust in her instincts again. She died at the age of 75, surrounded by her 6 children and her husband, Califer. She left this journal behind. It was passed down my family until one day being handed to me. My mother gave me this book when I was a child, making me promise to never lead a boring life and to always seek the truth. The little magic of that promise often finds me in trouble, but it has guided me to hundreds of stories out in foreign lands. However, when I got the book, I could not read it. It took me many years to find anyone who could translate it for me, as the language of the Alexelsians is not spoken by most who walk the world today. It wasn't until I met the great dragon Florian of the mountains, who taught me to read the Alexelsian language, using my own ancestors' journal to teach me how. I have grown attached to this story as it is, not with the context of the history of the Cataclysm or the stories of those who fought against the Lord of Sorrows, but as a story of a young woman on the day the world died. If I trust in my feet, just like my ancestor Achaia did, I will never be led astray. The night has grown long, and I believe it's time for rest. Tomorrow I will tell you of something a bit lighter. We will talk about those who live in Burrowhaven, a city of rodents to the north, and the history of their holiday, the Ferret's Feast. Until then, I ask you to think about the story of my ancestor Achaia, her struggles, and the life she managed to build outside of turmoil. No matter how dark the world gets, no matter what monsters may reign, never stop being human. Never surrender on love, and never stop trusting your feet. I have a tome of tales from every nation to share with you all. I have seen many monsters, many heroes. I have learned of the magic offered by the goddess, and the magic humans can conjure for themselves. I have seen warfare, and I have tales of peace. I cannot wait to tell them all to you. Good night, and thank you.
Legends of Lorelei is a narrative fiction podcast by Livewire Multimedia Stories. The Bard is voiced by Gwen Fullman. Written by Gwen Fullman. Co-executive produced by Gwen Fullman and Elizabeth Fullman, with music by Gwen Fullman. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please consider contributing to our Patreon If you would like updates on this project or any of our other projects, come follow us on Instagram at Livewire Multimedia, on Tumblr at Livewire Media, or subscribe to us on YouTube at Livewire Multimedia Stories. Thank you for listening.